How are we doing today? For those of you that don't know me, I think everybody here knows me, I'm Al Van Lith. I'm on the 100th Anniversary Committee. And as you know, back in September 12th, we kicked off our 100th anniversary celebration in year 101. And through the celebration, we're going to be having various events. And we thought, what a better way to have a first event than to invite Bishop Erickson over to talk to us. For those of you that don't know, Bishop Erickson's father was an associate pastor here at St. Matthew's. So he has a little bit of ties here to St. Matthew's. How long was it? 4 years. So he has a little bit of a tie here today at St. Matthew's. So he's coming in. He's going to talk a little bit about his time here, a little bit about the ELCA and how everything all fits into everything. As you know, we put together a nice anniversary book. If you haven't gotten it, they're for sale, $30. If you already purchased it and you haven't picked it up, there'll be some out in the commons area, library commons. But I want to present this book to Bishop Erickson for the Synod in commemoration of St. Matthew's 100th anniversary. As I tell everybody, there is one benefit to the COVID, and that is that we had an extra year to work on this book and put together this phenomenal the book. And Linda Chadwick is the one who really put her heart and soul into that as our editor. So.
Well, thank you. And before you go, as my father was Rodney Erickson. He passed away about 4 years ago. I'll talk a little bit more about that history. But in going through his stuff, he had this anniversary plate from St. Matthew's that lists the various buildings, and it was dated 1964, as you dedicated the Reverend William Niebling Christian Educational Center. And so I thought you might want to have this for your archives. I'm not sure if you have a copy of that plate, but I return it now to you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Just so you know, this original church, that's the building right there. That's the outside of the wall of the original church.
Wonderful. Yeah.
So,
great.
So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Time.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a microphone here, so I'm going to keep this one down here in case there are questions that folks want to ask as we go through this. But thank you. It's really good to be with you all today. Again, Paul Erickson. I am the child of, as I said, Pastor Rodney Erickson, who preceded Pastor Gary Erickson. So sometimes people think, oh, you're an Erickson, your dad was pastor. Are you Gary's son? No. So I'm Rodney's son, and my mother is Eva Erickson, and we moved here in, if my memory serves correctly, February of 1969. I was in second grade at the time, and I have two older brothers. Andy is 2 years older than I am, and our brother Steve is 4 years older. And so we were all at Lincoln School, and then Longfellow Middle School, and then my older brother Steve was at Tulsa East High School for a period of time. And then in November of 1972, my father accepted a call to Bethel Lutheran Church in Muskego. So then we moved out there, and we all graduated from Muskego High School. And so I was invited just to share a few stories of life when I was back here. I don't have 45 minutes of stories, so don't worry. I have a few reflections, and then we can certainly open it up for conversation and questions. I'm going to warn you, whoever, if you have anything about the mission exploration process or the ministry site profile or the call process, I'm going to invite you to come back at noon and have that conversation then. Pretty much anything else is fair game, okay? So coming back here to St. Matthew's, of course, a lot has changed. I think we were worshiping, wasn't that the old altar up there? And I remember that my mother, I was in second, third grade in Sunday school, and I remember many of you knew Mark Olson, an usher who died in August. He and I are the same age. So he and I were in Sunday school together. I remember his parents, Don and Marge. Don was a chaplain for much of his professional ministry, so he had his membership here. And his wife, Marge, they were parents of Mark. So in our families, being pastor to pastor kind of thing, we're friends with them. And so my basic memories of St. Matthew's is walking down the hallway from Sunday school to church, with my mother trying to comb my hair, because I didn't like to comb my hair in those days. You know, it was just kind of all over. So she's combing my hair as we're walking down the hall, trying to get into the church. We always had to sit up in the front pew, right? And I would look for, in the bulletin, I would hope that in all the sheets and pieces of paper that there would be a blank sheet of paper. So I encourage congregations to do that, because then I would take a pencil and I would just draw the whole service. I would not draw some like kids do. They draw the pastor or the candles or geez. I would draw football players, basketball players, baseball players, depending on what season of the year it was, right? And so that was how I kept myself busy during worship. Remember Emerson Miller and his intimidating presence? Those of you who grew up here, his sermon series that he preached, I think it was on the Ten Commandments. He actually published those in a book and would bring that out periodically. So yeah, and then like I said, I was started in second grade at Lincoln School and would walk. We lived first in a building that no longer exists. It was 1814 North 75th Street. Kind of have these addresses that stay in your brain sometimes as a kid. That's now been taken over and is now part of the grounds of the high school. We lived there for a year, and then we moved to 7904 Hillcrest. So just, a few blocks northwest of here. And so I remember in school, I got to walk home for lunch every day. You could eat lunch there, but I was close enough, so I would walk home. Actually, I would run home, eat lunch, and run back, because we then had recess time. And the first 4 people that got back for recess were the 4 batters for kickball, okay? And so if you got back first, and if you never got out, you never had to go into the field, right? So I would come back, and I would run home and run back, and usually would get there to be close to being one of the top 4, so I could be one of the kickers, one of the batters for kickball. Played also on the Lincoln School, we had a Cub Scout softball team that I would play on frequently with some other kids from the neighborhood. And so had a lot of fun hanging out in Wauwatosa. Again, my older brothers, Andy and Steve, were also part of Steve. My brother Steve was confirmed here with Emerson's daughter, Becky Miller. Many of you might know, she then also became a pastor, right? And so they were in the confirmation class, and shortly after that we moved to Muskego, graduated from high school there. Just a little update, as I said, my father passed away about 4 years ago, and then he and my mother divorced in 1979 as I was finishing high school. And my dad left the ministry at that time, did a lot of other things in his professional life. And then they both remarried, and father passed away 4 years ago. My mother is still living up in the Twin Cities. She moved up there in the early 80s. I went to Gustavus Adolphus College in St. Peter, and shortly after that she moved back where she was born, up to Minneapolis, St. Paul area. Remarried religion professor Dwayne Addison, and they were all back for my installation here 5 years ago. So it's kind of fun to have them come back to this place. Dwayne passed away 3 years ago, and my mother is, she's hanging in there, has had some mental challenges as a result of her diabetes, and so, as I say, the veil between past and present is now pretty permeable. So memories and present, it's all kind of swirling together, and so we try to be present in love with someone like who's experiencing those kind of challenges. It's not easy. My brother Andy is the one who lives closest, and he works daily visiting her, and he's our primary caretaker. So I'm grateful for his role in that way. Our oldest brother Steve and his wife Karen live in California, in Temecula, which is about an hour and a half northeast of San Diego. And he just retired. He was president of the Corona Clipper Company. They make lawn and garden tools. So he retired earlier this year, and Andy retired from his work. He was in government administration, supervised all the parole officers in Ramsey County, Minnesota, for about 20 years as his most recent position. And so then they keep saying, when are you going to retire? I'm like, I just turned 60. It's not time yet. But I've enjoyed then, after graduating from Muskego High School then, I went to college at Gustavus Adolphus College, St. Peter, Minnesota. Time in Baltimore and Mexico, seminary in Chicago, first called in Chicago, then moved to Milwaukee, 1993, was a pastor at Faith Lutheran Church on the near south side for nine and a half years. That's where I met my wife, and we have our 2 children, David and Sarah, in those years. And then in 2003, we moved up to the Twin Cities, so I took a call as an associate pastor of Augustana Lutheran Church, and then served on the Synod staff in St. Paul under Bishop Peter Rognus as director for Evangelical Mission, directed a small nonprofit for a couple years, and then was elected to come back to Milwaukee in 2016 to serve as bishop. I'm nearing the end of my first term, which may be my only term. We'll see. There's an election next spring, and we'll see what the Spirit and the Synod have in store for all of us after that. My wife, Lynn, is also an ELCA pastor. She had worked in the church her whole life, her adult life, and finally decided she should go to seminary and take a course or 2. And then 5 years later was done and ordained in 2009. So she just ended a call this summer at Ascension in Milwaukee, and is now in another 10 days going to start as an interim at Atonement back in Muskego. So we're kind of all our lives are a circle in some ways. We have 2 kids, David and Sarah. David will be turning, I got to do the math in my head now. He'll be 25 next week. Actually, Tuesday. He'll be 25. He lives up in the Twin Cities and is hoping to land at one of our church camps. That's kind of his dream position. He's applying for a job there and see how that goes. Our daughter Sarah just turned 21, and she is a 3rd-year student at Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts. So, trying to think if that's, so those are kind of my life and my connection here. It was a lot of fun to come back here again, like I said, for the installation back in 2016, and see all the changes that had taken place. Because when I was here, the courtyard was right out there, if I recall. I think that was the direction. Wasn't there a big outdoor courtyard? Because we have pictures of confirmation pictures, right, all taken outdoors in the courtyard. So a lot of changes. You know, what year did the sanctuary renovation take place?
This renovation was about 2000.
Okay, yeah, kind of switch things around. It's a wonderful, wonderful worship space. Works really well. So grateful to be back here. So that's kind of the extent of my reflections on life here at St. Matthew's. But if you have other questions that you might have, we can talk about St. Matthew's and my connection here, or we can talk about life in the Greater Milwaukee Synod or across the ELCA. So I'm happy to just have conversation for the next half hour or so. Sure. Gary? Nope, no relationship, except through perhaps Leaf. Yeah, Erickson's a very common name. When I was in college at Gustavus, I recall in our class there were 3 young women who had the name Kristen Lee Erickson, all spelled exactly the same, and they put them in the same room. They were roommates the first year and had the same. So you had to say, "Can I talk to Kristen? Which one? Kristen Erickson. Which one? Kristen Lee Erickson. Which one?" The one from Owatonna. Oh, okay. So that's the only way you could. So Erickson's a very common name in our Scandinavian heritage. So no relationship to Gary, although he's a good friend and colleague. Was connected to him just a few weeks ago. Had a meeting at his house. So any other questions that you might have about life? Yeah.
So growing up as a pastor's son.
Yeah.
Son of a pastor. How does that being part of the church, the pastoral side of the father and the fatherly side of the father, was there distinction, or was it, it's kind of hard to get that distinction between dad and pastor?
Well, I'm sure. I mean, we've got other pastors in the room here who are moms as pastors, and I'm sure every family is probably a little bit different. For me, I just remember growing up, it was just normal because my dad was ordained pretty much the same time I was born. So I always and only knew him as pastor. And certainly growing up, people would say, "So, are you going to be like your dad?" No, not at all. And so, young men often have to make a decision, and as kids do, like, do you want to be like your parents or different from your parents? Like in the sermon, it's kind of both and. There's some ways where you can't help but be connected to your parents, and other ways that you want to especially in adolescence, you want to create some kind of separation of identity and create your own space in the world. So I would never really consider myself as a possible pastor, actually until my dad left the ministry. So he left the ministry when I was about 15, a sophomore in high school. As my folks were separated, he took a break and then ended up leaving the roster doing other things. And that was really when I could actually think, well, yeah, and this is just my own adolescent arrogance. I could probably do it better, right? But then actually started to pay attention to the people that would come in and the next pastor and I look back in this now as bishop and I just kind of shake my head because my mom and I were very involved. I was singing in the choir at Bethel and Muskego. We were growing up there and it's a small congregation, so our presence was pretty significant. We did not leave the congregation when my dad left the ministry and my folks got divorced because this was home. This was the people who loved me. They helped me through a really, really hard time in my life. And so we just stayed. We never even had a conversation about should we go to a different church. And then they brought in the next pastor who has to, my mom was on the Synod Council. She was chairperson of the Synod Evangelism Committee. She represented the Synod at church-wide assemblies in the Lutheran Church of America. So she was a pretty significant leader in the church. I was kind of, the kid in the congregation, sang in the choir, quarterback on the football team, and the next pastor, Paul Hayes, had to come in and figure out how do we engage with folks like that. He did a marvelous job, and I'm really grateful. But I look back as bishop and say, man, we would not recommend that now. But I understood it from a family point of view. So that's one of the challenges now in this role, recognizing that there's multiple ways to get at the truth, and there isn't just always one right answer, that you have to take situations into account. And he invited me to preach my first and my second sermon, both of which were really, really bad, right? But that was the church that kind of loved me into seeing myself as a leader in the church. And then going off into college, I was a religion major. I didn't set off to be a religion major. Actually, it was the summer before my senior year when I said, oh, I better get a major. How many classes do I have, and what's the shortest path from where I am to having a major? Religion. Only need 2 more classes, so I did that. But it really wasn't until I went to Mexico. I did a year of Lutheran Volunteer Corps after college. Then I spent 4 months in Mexico learning Spanish. And I lived with a family that was involved in the base Christian communities. So every night they went to different Bible studies in different neighborhoods around Cuernavaca. And as I was learning Spanish, I would go with them to these Bible studies and just learn how to speak Spanish and understand all these different accents by hearing all these people reflect on the Bible. And all of these people had pretty limited formal education, but they were wise people. And as they reflected on how Scripture shaped their lives, I said, I need to be operating in that space because this is a powerful word that is available to us. And so that's where I finally made the decision to enter ministry, was when I was in Mexico. Can talk more about that, but and so then came back and enrolled in seminary in Chicago. But I think growing up as a PK, as we would call it, preacher's kid, it's a challenge, I think, in many respects because there is this public nature to your life that you didn't choose, that you are put into a spotlight sometimes. Obviously, it's different for different families and different personalities, but learning how to live with that and how much of that you want to accept and rebel against, it's a challenge. So try to honor that with our own kids, and they're double PKs. And when my wife was called and ordained into ministry, that's when I left parish ministry to work in the Synod office. So we were all members at the congregation where she was serving as pastor. So when it came time for confirmation, they had both of us for teachers, right? So, but their therapy bills are relatively low, so no, I think they both appreciate that, and every family's kind of got to figure it out, work it out for themselves. But it certainly presents challenges. Questions that you might have about life in the Greater Milwaukee Synod or anything else? Go ahead.
I remember the great, one of the church women's cluster meeting we had at Ascension, and you
Yes, yes. The question, are there people on, what, no one else is watching this online, or are they?
It's online and it's being recorded.
Gotcha. Okay, I'll repeat the question then, just in case. So the question had to do with monarch butterflies. My wife and I gave a presentation at a Women's of the ELCA event on kind of the life cycle of monarch butterflies. And so if you would ever want to follow me on Facebook or my wife, you will see lots of posts about monarch butterflies. The story on that connection goes back. My wife's mother lives on a farm in eastern Iowa, and for the last 30 years has been involved with tagging monarch butterflies as part of a project from the University of Kansas. And they were tracking the migration patterns of the monarch butterflies, and so they, over the years, have developed different kinds of stickers. Now there's a little round sticker about the size of like a pencil, diameter of a pencil head, and it has a website and a unique code on that sticker. So you catch monarch butterflies in August or September and tag them, and then they track their migration patterns. If they find them in Mexico, where they all winter, then they compensate those who find them. So she's been doing that for 30 years. My wife's been doing that for 20. So every fall we do that. And then in the summertime, before that, my wife will go hunting for monarch eggs and caterpillars, and then we'll bring them inside to increase the odds of survival. Because in the wild, you have the eggs has about a 1% chance of making it all the way to butterfly. So if you bring it inside and feed the milkweed to the caterpillar, then it increases the rate. Then you let them go, of course, when they come out of the chrysalis and fly away. So we, a couple times, have traveled to Mexico where they spend their winters. So I can talk all day about monarch butterflies, so I'll try to keep it limited here. But so the normal generation of a life cycle of monarch butterfly is about 4 to 6 weeks in the spring and summer, but starting about mid to late August until October, the generation born in that period of time will live for about 6 months. And they will fly all the way to the mountains just west of Mexico City. And so, and then they'll winter there, and then in the spring, that's when they will mate, and then the females will fly north and the guys die. So the females fly north and lay their eggs along the way, and that starts the cycle all over again. But there are a couple forests just west of Mexico City where literally millions upon millions of monarch butterflies will all congregate for the winter. Certainly less than there were. The numbers of monarch butterflies have been reduced by about 80% over the last 20 years because of climate change and deforestation in Mexico, etc. But it's still an impressive sight. So we were there winter of 2016 and then again the winter of 2019. And just going up into the mountains to the right elevation and seeing clusters and clusters of monarch butterflies. Because when they close their wings, they look like dead leaves. That's how they hide. So you look and you just see all this tree, it looks like all these dead leaves, but when the light hits it and it gets to be about 60, 62 degrees, all at once they just start flying. And they go around looking for food and whatever. So it's a breathtaking sight. We're talking about leading a trip down there sometime. COVID obviously has changed our ability to travel, but we love talking about monarch butterflies. My wife then, when she will catch them, and she will, as part of her ministry, she'll go to, visit shut-ins or kids or whomever and teach them and let them tag the butterfly and set them free. So then they start looking for milkweed, which is the only plant they'll use to lay eggs. And it increases their awareness of the amazing nature of God's creation. That there is some way, we don't even know how, the monarch butterflies, like 5 or 6 generations later, know how to go to the same forest year after year after year. It's part of this huge, cosmic design that we'll probably never understand, and that's okay. We can appreciate it, though, without understanding it, and give thanks to God that somehow it works, right? We're getting in the way of how it works because of the ways that we have impacted the environment, but certainly it's a beautiful part of God's creation. So we have fun with monarch butterflies a lot. So, how you doing, Ed?
Pretty well.
Good. Just saw Pastor Ed Weiscott, so who knew my mom and dad back in the day, right?
That's right.
Yeah, back in the 70s and 80s, back here in the Synod. So. Other comments or questions you might have about life in the greater Milwaukee? I see a question in the back. What have I enjoyed about being a bishop? There's a lot. Sometimes I say every day something beautiful happens. Maybe just one thing, and it might be fleeting, right? Because there certainly are challenges, but what I appreciate the most are just hearing the stories of how people engage in ministry in these challenging times, and the connections that people make, and the stories of partnership and innovation, and it's just kind of figuring it out. We all knew, in many respects, that the church was changing, and we've been on this long kind of pattern of change over these years. And I can use different metaphors to talk about that. One of the ways I describe it is that innovation used to be an elective course. Some churches would say, maybe we should get innovative. No, I don't think so. Now it is required, right? It is a core curriculum that if you don't figure out new ways of doing the ancient things, you simply won't be doing them much longer. And I think we're not quite sure what that's going to look like. And I know that that can raise anxiety to very significant levels, right? And especially in a congregation like St. Nat's that has had, you haven't called a senior pastor from outside in over 50 years? Because you had Pastor Niebling who retired, Pastor Miller who retired, Pastor Erickson who retired, Pastor Mankey who was then, and it was the associate became the senior. That was just how things worked, which is very unusual in the life of the church, right? Not unprecedented, but that's to have that many times in which that happened and happened successfully is unusual. And so now you're into this period of leadership transition in the midst of a time of significant cultural and social transition, right? And so that's part of the invigorating, I'm not going to say enjoyable, invigorating part of being a bishop is recognizing that in the midst of all of that uncertainty, when we just can't cling to this is how we've always done it, I find that breaks open our ability to appreciate the work of the Holy Spirit, right? Because we recognize that, you know what? I am not in charge. We are not in charge. And we have to lean on the Holy Spirit because none of us are smart enough. None of us are anything enough to figure it out by ourselves. And to be kind of pushed back into that because, serving in the bishop's office or serving in any leadership position, we sometimes can get lulled by the siren song of, you can figure this out. If you strategic plan enough, if you figure it out, if you do all the right things, you can then kind of like play chess, right? Like in the bishop's office, you say, well, if this person goes here, then we move that person there, then we're going to, and the Holy Spirit comes and says, wipes the chessboard clean, and then says, trust in me. Not in your own wisdom or experience or whatever, trust in me. And I think that being pushed and pulled and called into that position of trust in the Holy Spirit and believing that God is actually going to show up, that's the exciting part. And I get to see that in lots and lots of different scenarios across the Synod. Doesn't always happen in the smoothest of ways, in painless ways, but that God uses all of that stuff to do amazing things. So it's kind of fun to be able to see and appreciate those. So. Question in the back from Pastor Sheila.
What are, as you have seen around Synod, what are some of the more interesting pandemic adaptations that you've seen in different churches? Like, I explained to you how we serve communities.
Right.
What are COVID adaptations? What are some of the interesting ones you've seen?
Question is, what are some of the interesting COVID adaptations or innovations that I have witnessed? Certainly, churches have done communion in a number of ways. This is the first time I've had this particular style of communion that works very well, given not a lot of churches have the architecture, the space to be able to do it in the way that you do it. Worked very well in my opinion. Many churches are doing the little portable communion cups where you've got the juice and the wafer and one little coffee creamer Jesus thing, and you pick those up on your way in. Everyone stays seated and do it. I think the biggest, what I appreciate the most are the ways that we have blended technology into the live experience and invited other people who may not come to church, and it's not even because of COVID, right? They wouldn't come to church even if COVID wasn't a thing because they have mobility issues or they're in residential facilities and they just can't travel. But they are now able to experience the live worshiping community in a way that they couldn't before. I think other innovations that I've seen have to do with, certainly with Christian education, that especially now with young people having to spend all day, last year was on Zoom, now it's with masks, and it's hard, how do you go to confirmation class and sit in a classroom with masks on when you've been doing that all day and you got 14 other things going on. So there have been some challenges, but some places, for example, have done where they've, they'll record the lesson on a video, 10, 12, 15-minute video, and the students can watch that when it makes sense in their lives, right? And then they can comment or get together in Zoom groups and breakout groups or engage kind of a little bit more of a decentralized confirmation curriculum. So there's some ways that works. Doesn't always work in every context because you lose some things when you do that. You know, that kind of the camaraderie of being together in a class and goofing off and hanging out. But sometimes that's no longer possible no matter what because young people have sports and drama and choir and all these other kinds of things, but yet faith is still an important piece of that. So I found some good innovative ways of trying to still stay connected with young people that don't say, well, you've got to show up Wednesday night at 6:30 for a meal and a class until 8 o'clock. That may or may not always work. So I think that's one of the, and the other thing I think that some people have actually appreciated, having congregational meetings on Zoom sometimes have actually worked better than the old congregational meetings or council meetings, right? Some people say, you know, actually we get a lot more done and there's less chatter in Zoom, right? So it's been, I think, a challenge for us to figure that out. But I think there are some possibilities that we may want to hold on to, some changes that we've been forced into that we may want to hold on to going forward. So, I think I saw another comment or question before that over here. Maybe my memory is. Other thoughts or questions?
In the Greater Milwaukee Synod, I was on council under your predecessor, Bishop Erickson. I believe at that time there were 133 congregations.
Okay.
What has changed and have the number of congregations changed? There's a couple mergers that happened, a couple just went away.
Sure. As of today, we have 119 congregations. The question was about life in the Greater Milwaukee Synod. When Al was on council before, there were 133 congregations in the Greater Milwaukee Synod. So what's the number today? The number today is 119 congregations, and that is, when I came into office in 2016, there were several mergers, 2-into-1, 3-into-1 mergers, about 4 or 5 of those that took place in the preceding years. Since I've been in office, we have had 4 congregational closures, 2 last year, and another congregation has sold their building and is now sharing space. Redemption Lutheran Church in Wauwatosa sold their building last year, and they are now worshiping and taking up space at Martin Luther Church by the Zoo Interchange on Blue Mound. Not sure what the future will bring for those, but they're kind of living together for a while just to see how it goes. And certainly, I think we will see how this pandemic has really challenged congregations. The number of congregations that are able to afford a full-time pastor is certainly changing. There are congregations that may have had 2 pastors that now have 1, congregations that had a full-time pastor that now have a part-time pastor. There's still a lot of uncertainty, and I'm not sure where this is all going to land, right? And I'm not sure, it may take 5 or 10 years before the dust kind of settles and we kind of see, and it may continue to change for other reasons, right? There's a long history of change and institutional change across the mainline traditions across the country over the last 20, 30, 40 years, right? And this certainly, I think, compressed that timeline and sped it up for some congregations, but we'll have to see. So, Karen. This congregation or just in general?
Any, ideal congregation.
Oh, how do I appreciate a congregation's participation in the life of the Synod? Well, certainly, there are many ways in which we try to be, as I say, church together for the sake of the world. And that takes a number of ways that we try to live that out. Certainly, having congregational partnerships, as you all do here, relationships from which so we can learn together and be together in ministry and mission that are not simply writing a check, right? Money is a great way to provide support to ministry, right? I don't want to downplay that. But if it's only writing a check, then it seems to me to be a shallower than possible relationship. So having those kind of joint Bible studies and experiences where we walk with and learn from, right? I mean, a traditional mindset is that those who have wealth and education and experience can teach and give to others. But we have to realize that the giving goes both ways, right? That we have a lot to learn from every single person that we meet in every single congregation. They may be worshiping 32 people on a Sunday morning, 1/10 the number of people that might worship here, but they can bless you and change you. So we have to be open to that kind of mutual change, and that only happens by being in relationship with others. So certainly I invite congregations to be in relationship with others, other congregations, but also in relationship with other organizations in their context, the schools and the businesses and the other things, recognizing that we are not islands unto ourselves, but we are connected to the world in which we live. So that connection, again, that relationship that I was preaching about can get exhibited in this partnership relationship, certainly the global partnerships. This congregation, again, is a leader in both our El Salvador and Tanzanian partnerships. That's something near and dear to my heart. I've visited both of those places, spent a lot of time traveling to Central America, etc. And I deeply value those relationships as well because I think we can appreciate the fullness of the gospel in a different way. Sometimes the comment that I'll make when I'm returning from a trip is, I feel like I know less about them than I did before because I realize how much there is that I don't know, right? So it's important to hold on to that spirit of humility in the midst of those relationships in a posture of listening and learning and appreciating how God speaks to us in different voices. So certainly those are some of the key dimensions of what I would hope all of our congregations, in their own way, right? We all have different gifts and abilities to connect, but to be open to that connection. And to be open to the work of the Holy Spirit in new ways. The church is going to look very different in the years to come than it has in the years past. But trusting that God is in the midst of that, right? And we're not, the only way to gain is by losing. Right? Those who love their life will lose it. Those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will find it. And I think we have to hold some things loosely, right? While we hold on to the gospel really, really tightly. But the forms of ministry and that willingness to say, all right, if it means we have to, sell our building or do this differently or let go of that tradition or ritual or custom in order to appreciate and proclaim the gospel more clearly. That's always the why, right? It's not for our own survival as an institution. It is for the sake of the gospel. That's the key part of that verse. Losing my life for the sake of the gospel. So I applaud and celebrate congregations that are able to hold the forms of ministry loosely while clinging to the values of the gospel tightly. Any other questions? Ed?
We hear about experimental ministries occurring here and there.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have some of those going on in our synod?
Yes.
So tell us about it.
Sure. What we have we call them synodically or synod authorized worshiping communities. That's the formal language that we use now for kind of new start ministries. We currently have 3 of those in the Greater Milwaukee Synod. One of those is called The Table, which is led by Venus Williams. It is housed in the summertime at Alice's Garden. Some of you may know of Alice's Garden on the north side, where there's kind of a pavilion in the center, and Wednesday nights they will often gather for prayer and reflection, and Venus leads that community. And then it's kind of a house church model in the winter. So that's and there's a whole lot that is kind of connected. Venus is this very creative magnet for ministry. A lot of individual-owned, black-owned, kind of small businesses that mostly women, but not exclusively women. It's kind of an incubator for those folks to kind of develop their own business skills. So there's a way, they'll have these farmers markets at the garden and things like that. But that is one of our Synod Authorized worshiping communities. The second one that we have is called Breaking the Chains, and that is a ministry housed at the Felmers Chaney Correctional Institute, also on the north side. That is a pre-release center for adult men who have been incarcerated, and they then are transferred to this. They then have jobs, and they can kind of transition into life after being incarcerated. So there's a connection certainly with Project Return, which is another long-standing ministry in the Greater Milwaukee Synod. But this actually goes into the prison. So we have a minister, David Raby is currently the person who is in that position. It's been challenged obviously during COVID and going in and all those things, but that ministry is still going on. There is, we're in conversations right now with the county. They're talking about actually closing that center and creating a youth center that they are mandated, that what was it, Lincoln Hills they had to close. They're talking about raising Felmers Chaney and doing away with it completely, not replacing it. And there was a rally a couple weeks ago where we said, there are a few things that are working in this system, and this is one of the things that's actually working. So don't shut it down. Find another place to have the youth ministry or the youth center that they need to have. So, but that's a ministry that is it is an recognized ministry within. There's a Prison Congregations of America. There's a national grouping of ministries that take place in prisons. So that's one. And then the third one is called the Wayfarers Faith Collective. It's kind of a group hub house church model where Pastor Michael McAllister is gathering people together. What is it? Big questions, thirsty souls. And they have conversations, and that's kind of again, COVID has really challenged that ministry as well, but we're hopeful that they'll be able to find their footing again as they move out of it. So we have those three ministries. We also, of course, have campus ministries at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, at the Corner House, and then another ministry that has been historically at Marquette. That is now shifting to more of a downtown focus for campus ministry. But campus ministry has also been a place that has been a kind of a source of innovation and new ministry throughout its history as we try to connect with young adults, and really not just college students, but young adults who are looking for faith communities to connect with. So, but we're also hopeful that we will have other new ministries develop as we go forward, and so we're always looking for new ideas. So if you got one, Ed, let me know. Yeah.
In your lifetime, your experience of diversity and change in that respect, in our culture here in the Midwest or the United States, and comparing that with Central America, where you
So just to compare the different experiences of diversity and culture?
between the inclusivity and the diversity
Sure.
in our culture
Mhm.
versus what you experience there.
So the question has to do with kind of comparing, contrasting understandings of diversity and openness to other cultures here as opposed to other countries, perhaps in Central America, where I've spent significant time. One of the lessons that I have learned that I tried that influenced, for example, the sermon today, was just the rich and incredible diversity that we have. For example, I speak Spanish and speak it fluently, have lived in Mexico, have traveled frequently to Guatemala, Nicaragua, El Salvador. And what I know of the Latino culture is that there is no such thing as the Latino culture. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of different understandings and cultural perspectives. Even in Guatemala, the place that there's a village that my church that I was a pastor of in Minnesota was partnered with a small community in northern Guatemala, the Petén department, and this was a group of Mayan Indians who had been ripped up from their homeland during the Civil War, 80s and 90s, They were living in a refugee camp in Mexico, and the government came as the war was kind of settling down and coming to an end. They came to the refugee camp and said, all right, you can't go back to where you came from, which is really hard because the Mayan Indians, they have a strong relationship with the land. They believe in many respects that the land is actually their mother, and they would live in the same place generation upon generation upon generation. And there were, I don't know the exact number, about 25 different Mayan languages, right? So Mayan Indians, even among themselves, have 25 different languages. But they were kind of all got mixed up in the refugee camps because they just got ripped up from the land. Many of them were kids, adolescents, their parents were killed. They went to these camps as adolescents, they're now adults, and they're coming back together. And the government said, here's some land, y'all want to come and make a town here? So we'll build a school, we'll give you houses, and we'll make sure that you've got running water and electricity. It's taken a very long time for those promises to get fulfilled. So the community that we had visited had 10 different Mayan groups that were living, 500 people in this village. Spouses married across language lines. So the only language they have in common is Spanish, which is their second language. The kids sometimes learn the mother's language and cannot speak to their father except in Spanish, and the father's Spanish may be limited. And so I would go and listen in on a council meeting, and the people afterwards would reflect and say, well, you know, he's Mum, and he's Kachikel, and he's Quiche. And they all went, oh, that explains it. And I'm like, what? What do you mean? And for us, it'd be kind of like, well, you know, he's Danish, and he's German, and he's Italian, right? And you might have some understanding that there's a personality that is somehow shaped by one's cultural upbringing. So the amount of diversity that's present, even in that small 500-person village in Guatemala, is immense. So it appreciates the fact that I know so little, right? I think I know Spanish, and I learned Spanish in central Mexico. There's a couple dozen different cultures within Mexico. And so we have to acknowledge that every person that you meet, just because you look at them and say, oh, this is a well-dressed white person from Wauwatosa. I know those people. No, I don't. We have to stop and listen and learn and appreciate what is your unique story, what is your unique heritage. And that is slow and messy work, right? We want a shortcut. I think in our culture, I am guilty of this sometimes, and I'm trying to get over it, we are intellectually lazy, right? We want to look at a person and say, oh, you voted for fill in the blank, now I know who you are, right? We want to put people into boxes, into categories, and recognize that we're all different, we're all unique. There's this incredible diversity. So that balance between the unity and the diversity is really central to how I see the world. And so going to these other places and traveling and experiencing the rich diversity has really grounded me in humility, because I know every person's story is different and they have something to teach me. I hope that our congregations can kind of have that appreciation for their neighborhoods as well. All of the people who are coming to live in this community, I mentioned in my sermon how we have neighbors now that are Rohingya. They are Muslim refugees from Malaysia, and I have to figure out what that means. Like, for example, the young daughter who is very good at English and translates for the parents who have very limited English. She'll come out in the backyard, and she's got her, when I come home, she goes inside and puts on her veil. And I'm like, okay, I need to honor her. So I can't befriend her in the same way that I might, because, you know, as a 14-year-old girl, I'm a man, and I don't quite understand all the rules, but I want to be respectful and welcoming. What does that mean? That's going to take some time to figure out, and that's why it's kind of slow and messy, but it is holy work. And so I hope all of us can take a deep breath and recognize that the life of ministry is slow and messy and holy all at the same time.
Yes, backtracking on your innovative ministries, what strikes me is what you're doing with the quote-unquote excellent congregations that are closing, who would provide the financial support for those experimental ministries.
Sure.
That's got to be important. I mean, I realize I'm being pragmatic, materialistic, but what about stuff like make it work?
Yeah, so he's asking a very pragmatic question about where do the dollars come from to make it work if many of our congregations who previously may have been able to provide support are closing. I don't know we have, well, for example, I'll just tell the story real quickly of our Savior's Lutheran Church on Wisconsin Avenue. was a very large, predominant congregation over many years, and over the course of the last few years came to a realization that their ministry was coming to an end. And so and this would have happened, I think, regardless of COVID, because they were well on their way to move in this direction, but finally made that decision last July, sold their building to a local kind of a charter school, a high school, and then transferred they have a legacy plan, right? And so they met with a kind of a person who helped them craft, as an individual or family would, where is your estate going to go? So they had those decisions. They then, 20% here, 10% there, et cetera. A significant gift, I think it's about 20% of their overall gift, was left to foster new ministry development in the Greater Milwaukee Synod. Okay, so we now have, I think it'll be $120,000 that came to the Greater Milwaukee Synod to foster new ministry development. And there are other congregations that are making similar decisions. We're involved right now in a $2.3 million capital campaign, mission appeal in the Greater Milwaukee Synod, trying to raise funds for innovation, collaboration, and leadership, right? Congregations will be invited. We've slowed things down because of the pandemic, right? We can't go nearly as fast, so probably a year from now we'll be inviting congregations like yours to consider participating in that. But we're trying to organize the resources, the financial resources, because God isn't done with us yet. But we're also recognizing that a lot of the innovations that God is calling us into don't require a lot of money, right? The vision of starting a church where you have a building and a full-time pastor and the people to pay for it, we won't be starting churches like that. It's simply not how God is calling us to engage in ministry going down the road. All the three churches that I mentioned, none of them, Breaking the Chains, The Table, Wayfarers, they're never going to own a building or have a full-time pastor, right? So we have to find new ways that aren't so cost-heavy to make the mission of the church continue. I see Al standing up, which I think is his way of saying, so thank you for your ministry, your witness, for helping me as a 7 to 10, 12-year-old kid grow up in the faith. This is an important place in my own faith journey, so glad to be back now in this role.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, and we'll be back at 12 o'clock, worship at 11 and town hall meeting at 12, and I'm not going to sleep here tonight though, I'm going home.